on this computer. All right, here we go.
All right. Hello, world. This is our first, well, what was supposed to be a live stream, but then when we went to launch the live stream, we realized it would take 24 hours to verify. And now here we are on our not so live stream. So we just wanted to go over a few things like what Alienation Awareness Coalition is about. We're going to go through what parental alienation is, the 5-factor model, and just, you know, a little bit about the two of us and why we started this in the first place. So I guess our mission statement would...
Wait a minute, let's just first introduce who we are. So I'm Jennifer Segi, and I am a parent-child coach and co-parenting coach who specializes in high conflict. So this is something across the board that I see on a larger scale, and it's happening more often. So, you know, that is my mission, and I'll tell you a little bit about my personal experience later, but that's one reason that Kira and I teamed up, is to make sure that we protect our children from the psychological abuse. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Kira.
So my name's Kira. I have been going through parental alienation for the last 4 years, probably longer, because parental alienation starts while you're still in the relationship for the most part. And it came to a head over the last like 2 years, and has gotten to the point where I haven't seen or spoken to my children in about 8 months. So I'm coming from a currently living in the situation standpoint, like real life experience. And, you know, I thought that, you know, it's just so important that we get these stories out there so that people become aware that this is a real thing. I know I didn't learn about, the way I learned about parental alienation was actually from Reddit. And, you know, the information out there, it's hard to come by, because you don't recognize what it is when you're in it until, you know, you start like hearing about it from like Reddit, or, you know, where was one of the other places? I think that a couple of Facebook chats or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Like,
and you make a really good point, Kira, because unless you know the name for it, you're not really sure what to search. And that's like another problem that the community has, is what to officially call it, because Dr. Gardner came up with the term parental alienation syndrome. And since then, it's been identified that it's not a syndrome, because it actually happens in a larger dynamic outside of the child, where syndrome just happens in an individual themselves. And so I know when other professionals call it something else, and I've tried to find information on if they call it like pathological alienation or custodial.
That's originally what I called it too.
Interference, you really don't get that much information about it. So there's, on all these different levels, it is difficult for parents to find that information. So that's our mission. Our mission, you know, is to make sure parents have this information so they can identify the signs as it's starting to occur, so they can have early intervention and save our children from the psychological abuse. And that's a lot of your story, Kira, is a lot of what I see amongst parents, is they don't know what's going on until all contact has been cut off. And
yes.
So some of your experience right now, I know that you're going through courts, and unfortunately, courts, even doing the best they can, they don't operate at the same pace. And as months go by, the alienation can even set in even more.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's definitely navigating those waters. And, you know, I'm working with a great lawyer right now, and even she's just starting to learn about parental alienation, because it's not something widely talked about on a litigation, like, you know, level. And, you know, I'm definitely glad that we have this going. Should we mention our mission statement?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Okay, so our mission statement is to bring awareness to parental alienation through the act of storytelling or story times. It's a good way of realizing there are real humans behind this. It's not like we can break down all the clinical jargon and what it looks like, but if we're actually hearing the stories and able to identify, like, okay, this situation happened and this is like, these are the outcomes from it, here's a better way that you can, like, tackle it, because like what one of our plans, and hopefully like we can definitely execute this, is to do like somebody's story and then have sort of like what we're doing here, where we kind of break down the person's story and say, like, this is a really good example of one parent slowly, like, I'm only familiar with the dating term negging, but like speaking negatively about the other parent to start, and then it slowly builds. Yeah.
And that's the number one on the list of the 17 alienating factors. So yeah, and I definitely want to kind of piggyback off what you're saying is that, for target parents to be able to tell their stories and what they've been through, it's a nightmare, a psychological nightmare that they live every day. And a lot of people, they don't understand it, and they can re-traumatize the target parent, because if they don't understand, sometimes they make comments of like, well, what did you do wrong? You must have done something wrong that you don't have custody of your kids. Instead of understanding, there's a whole another dynamic that's going on, and how, just thinking of Stockholm syndrome, how easy it is for a kidnapper to kidnap an adult and brainwash the adult within a couple days. We're talking about a parent, a trusted individual of a child who has the child's brain. They are defenseless against this. And part of the intervention that I do with parents when we catch it early is we inoculate the child to help them think for themselves, in order to question and make sure that they're just not automatically being believed what other, the alienating parent is saying. So we want to provide a platform for parents to tell their stories, for it to be therapeutic for them. But then we also have a long-term goal, is we want to create a Netflix series, so that the normal population, people who are still married, they are introduced to parental alienation. And with the statistics right here in America, 50% end up in divorce. So we have to educate the population. So we're in this for the long run, and we appreciate all the support. So I'm going to say this now: make sure you subscribe and tell your friends. Make sure you're watching.
Like the video.
Yeah, like the video.
Hit the like button.
Any proceeds that we get off of this is going right towards that long-term goal of taking it to the general population. I know sometimes parents who are going to search parental alienation are already going through it, and it's great that we can provide, some, acknowledgement from where they're coming from too. But we have to get the word out there. So that's our mission. So for those of you who don't know exactly what parental alienation is, there are, I guess Dr. Amy Baker describes it really good. She says it's a mental condition in which a child, usually whose parents are engaged in a high conflict separation or divorce, aligns him or herself with one parent. And so here are some of the parental alienation tactics. And from what I've researched, I do think this list is going to grow. I do see other kinds of tactics being used by parents that aren't even in this. But bad mouthing, as Kira and I had discussed before, I think you had said that was part of your situation.
That was definitely like the bad mouthing, and then also the control of the narrative. So so changing something that was innocuous, or like not like something small may have happened, like child bruised their knee, and then the alienating parent would change that into like, oh well, they're being abused. Like obviously they're coming home with bruises all over themselves. the kid climbed a tree and bumped their knee. I don't know what to tell you, buddy.
Boys, right?
Yeah, I have 2 boys.
I have 2 boys too. That's like the history. Like that's their life story when they're little. Is they're so adventurous. They're gonna
Yes.
get bumps and bruises, and it's just part of being a child. But to think about being a parent and that could possibly be used against you,
Oh my
that you're
God.
letting your
Yeah.
child just play naturally with something that's very healthy. But if they get a bump or a bruise, you're going to be out to look like the abuser and reported to CPS. We've had that
Yes.
happen. My husband
I've
had that happen before I met him.
I had that happen 3 different times.
And it happened, like, he didn't get to see his son for 1 month while there was an investigation going on, and the investigation
Mhm.
found that no, that wasn't accurate about what the mother was saying happened to the son.
Oh, absolutely. And then, the kids also hear it, like, a lot of the times, like, with my younger son, he would start believing the story because, he would initially say like what actually happened. And then because it was slowly being changed, he was remembering it differently because he was being fed what to essentially think.
Yeah.
Whereas the older one would be like, no, that's not how it happened, because he was old enough to be able to kind of advocate for himself on a smaller scale, of course.
Mhm.
But there was something that you said that I thought there would be a good point to, but that train left. So you go ahead.
So when it comes back, you let me know. So
Yes.
the next one is limiting physical contact,
Mhm.
limiting communication, which Kira talked about that she's been going through this for months, is that no physical contact, no communication, even limiting mentioning the target parent in their presence. Or if a child, it's very normal that the child wants something like a picture or a toy that reminds them of the other parent when they're with one parent, and those items are taken away. So it's starting to again um, just separate that connection that the child has with that target parent, because when they don't have any kind of connection there. So those are like the very beginning steps of this. Um, the alienator will withhold love or approval
Yep.
if the child is not siding with the alienating parent. So therefore,
Yes.
the child, and I think of like adults who have gone through this of, where an abuser has withheld love and approval, and it changes the adult's behavior. So how can we expect that the children are going to be able to stand up and combat these tactics?
Oh, to interject, I'm sorry. So the other thing that I wanted to mention about like the like changing the narrative, what it also does is when you're with the child, you're not acting as the best version of your parenting self, because you're you're in constant anxiety of like, well, if they get a bruise on them, or if they do this, or if they do that, then it's going to come back that I'm being a bad parent, when in reality you're just like, kids are going to like roughhouse, they're going to do these things, and it has that effect on the alienated parent that they're always hyper vigilant.
Mhm.
And it that kind of stress comes out in different ways. People process their stress different ways,
Yeah.
like being angry, defensive,
Yeah, and that amount of stress there, it is a natural human reaction to, be more defensive or have the anger, have the anxiety. And that's when emotional contagion can also set in. Our kids are very sensitive to emotional contagion, especially
Yes.
negative emotions from the parent. They pick up on that feeling as well. And so then they start to associate the target parent as somebody who doesn't make them feel good, because they're
Yes.
starting to pick up on those emotions, so they just avoid. So that's why it's not a syndrome. There's so many different layers that are going on with the alienating parents starting these tactics.
Sorry, I interjected. The train came back. So
Like that saying, the train came back.
um oh, so was that all? That was the 5-factor model, right? Like that
No,
was that all?
we're still going through the 17 factor model.
Oh, okay.
So here's another really big one, is that the alienating parent tells the children that the target parent does not love them. So now thinking about, well, my mom doesn't love me, they start to get defensive and withdraw because it's a very hurtful feeling.
Yeah.
Instead of like seeking out and being assertive, which again, you don't have these skills unless you're taught, and say, Mom, do you not love me? That's what Dad's saying.
Yeah.
So it is very likely that many children in this situation will just withdraw because of that hurt. Also, allowing or forcing the child to choose between parents. Also, here's another one, big one, is making the child believe they are unsafe with the target parent. So I've heard things of like a dad letting the child ride on a four-wheeler. Very typical, normal, fun thing to do when you're a child. And the mom convinced the daughter that he was trying to kill her because the dad put her on a four-wheeler. So things like that, again, very normal parenting, wanting to make sure your child has opportunities and experiences, and it's just turned at every angle, turned against you. Let's see, confiding in the children, so telling them information. I had a session yesterday in which the mom is alienated from her daughter, and the dad told the daughter that the mom had the affair. Now the daughter is holding a grudge against the mom, feeling like she's ruining the relationship with I'm sorry, she was the one who ruined the marriage, although there was a history of both sides. But mom being the target parent and not saying anything bad about dad, that caused that alienation there.
Yeah, it's like cherry picking information that helps their narrative. Like they will pick out, rather than showing them both sides. Like, I wasn't great in this relationship either, like we both had our problems, kind of thing. Instead, it's just like, well, your mom did this and your mom did this and your mom did this. And it's pretty terrible.
Yeah, the target parents really try to walk that fine line and not badmouth, and but they're hearing all these bad things about one side and not the other side, and that's a hard, I still haven't found a fine line or how target parents can handle that, but some of the experts say that those definitely need to be challenged. Asking the child to keep a secret, asking the child to spy on the target parent, forcing the child to reject the target parent, again using that kind of withdrawal of love and approval, referring to the target parent as his or her first name. So again, that's creating the psychological effect that you're no longer my mother, and it's also undermining the target parent's authority, which is another tactic, because the alienating parent takes the other parent out of that authority figure as well, and that parent can't give some consequences that are very important for our children to have, and so that's another factor. Also, then referring to dads or step parents as dad or mom, so then replacing the target parent. Changing the child's name, so again taking away that association with the other parent. So sometimes moms may change the child's last name to take the dad's last name away, or sometimes dads may give a child a new nickname to kind of, and it's really actually creating this whole new identity for the child too when you change the child's name, that's separate and has no connection to what the relationship was with before the target parent. And then the last one is withholding any kind of medical or social academic information from the parents. So those are the 17 parental alienation tactics. I want to go through quickly the 8 behavioral manifestations of the child. And this is when the tactics of alienation are starting to set in. The first, what's called a campaign of denigration. This is where the child starts bad mouthing the target parent and tries to convince other people that that parent is bad. And it lacks the ambivalence that they will not say anything positive about the parent. It's very normal as humans that we have positive and negative characteristics or weaknesses and things we need to work on, but the child will only see the negative in the target parent. and I would just say this, when it's mild, they'll still have both. They'll say some bad things, but there will be some positive. When it gets severe, nothing is positive about the target parent. Weak, frivolous, or absurd rationalization. So this is reasons why they refuse to see the parent. I had one girl tell me that she didn't want to see her mom because she didn't like that her mom didn't give her a schedule of what they were going to do 3 days in advance. And that was the only reason why she could come up with that she doesn't ever want to see her mom. Lack of ambivalence for the favored parent. So this is kind of the opposite of what I just talked about before, is they see the favored parent or the alienated parent as perfect. They say nothing bad about the parent. They don't see any of their weaknesses. They also will have what's called the independent thinker phenomenon. And this is when they will tell professionals and tell other people that they are old enough to think for themselves. This was totally their idea. And what's really interesting in cases, even when they're not asked, they will still emphasize that they think for themselves. So that is really a sign that they're being coached by the alienator. There's an absence of guilt. The child will treat the target parent awful and have no remorse or no guilt for how the parent is being treated. And they believe their behavior is justified because they are brainwashed to think that the target person is such an evil person that they deserve that treatment. Reflexive support of the favorite parent. Again, whatever the favorite parent says is what goes. They don't question anything, even if something's presented to them like, well, your parent said this is wrong. Nope, the parent's still absolutely right. Presence of borrowed scenarios. This is when a child will hear adults, the alienator, speak, or even other people around the alienator, and they will use those scenarios of why they do not want to have a relationship with mom or dad. I had one case in which a 6-year-old girl said she was traumatized, but when the therapist asked her, well, what does it mean to be traumatized? Had no idea, but she just kept emphasizing she was traumatized, could not give any evidence of why. So that would be a good example of the presence of borrowed scenarios. And then last is the rejection of the target parents, friends, and family. So when the alienation really takes over, this is when the alienator will start working on other people too, because like the grandparents or the target parents' friends can start to give them different ideas and introduce them to the good parts of the target parent. So the alienator is attempting to cut all that off and isolate. And some people are maybe not ready to acknowledge that this is an abusive situation. But think of what an abuser does. An abuser cuts off the victim from all other people, isolates them so that they can continue to abuse. And so we have to acknowledge that this is psychological abuse for our children. Real quick here, I know I'm running through a lot of information, but in order to identify if this is parental alienation compared to estrangement, we do use the 5-factor model, which is one, is the child refusing contact? And if the child is starting like some of the mild or moderate, I think we should still consider it. But if they're refusing contact, we're looking at a severe case. Did the rejected parent and child have a positive relationship prior to the separation? So that's really important, because if they didn't have a good bonding, throughout childhood, and they still don't have a good bonding, well, that, doesn't mean that the parent who has been there for the child is engaging in the alienating tactics. Is there any abuse or neglect by the rejected parent? And so again, if there's physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, or neglect, we don't want to, we can't force kids to continue to stay in that toxic situation. And that's not at all what we were talking about. That would be estrangement. With parental alienation, we are talking about healthy parents who are always there for their children before, and it is manipulation that is interfering with the relationship. And then the 4th factor is the favored parent engaging in those 17 alienating factors that we talked about? And number 5 is, are we seeing any of the 8 behavioral manifestations? I will say this, I've seen kids who I've seen situations when parents do engage in the alienation tactics, but the kids don't become alienated because they do have some of the skills that help inoculate them from that. So just because there's not any behavioral manifestations that's good doesn't mean that parental alienation tactics aren't going on. But in the severe cases that the court really needs to know about and intervene, or even CPS, is seeing those behavioral manifestations there. So those are, that was a lot of information, I know.
Yes.
If you have any questions or comments, we'd like for you to
Absolutely.
comment below, and we can definitely create more videos that answer any of the questions.
Yeah, like definitely leave your responses and let us know like some of the information you want to like kind of zero in on if it resonated with you. Um, I know that there were some things that Jen was saying that I was just like, oh, I recognize that and I recognize that. And I was coming up with examples in my head of what I've gone through personally. And yeah, it's like when I think that especially when you have come from an abusive situation, like a lot of times, like when you're in the abusive situation, you know something's wrong, but when you don't have the vocabulary for it, you're just like, I can't pinpoint what's going on. Like, you know, you might be gaslit. And the thing is, gaslighting is so insidious and hard to like really articulate until like before you have the term gaslighting.
Mhm.
And you know, Darvo was another one that you know I was just like, oh, that's exactly what was happening to me, but I couldn't pinpoint it because I didn't have the vocabulary. So the more that we get this information out there, the more that you can isolate, like, okay, these things are really happening to me.
Mhm.
And it should help if you are going to, like, you can't say for sure that'll help with court, but it doesn't hurt it doesn't hurt to have that knowledge. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And again, the quicker you identify what's happening, you can bring them back to, using techniques and tactics to help the child understand what's happening and give them skills so that they can protect themselves from the brainwashing.
Yes.
So that's what our big goal is for this. But really something interesting. So in the last several years, I've worked with high conflict families, and this has just been an overlapping issue that I really felt like I needed to dig into and fully understand. But
Yeah.
I had a repressed memory that I totally, obviously, repressed memory forgot about. But when my son's co-parent and I were going through court to try to figure out what the parenting schedule should be, that was, gosh, he's almost 18 now. So that was many years ago. He was 2 years old at the time. And he was not verbal. He had a little bit of a speech delay. And that could have been because of the stress that was, we were going through at the time. But I remember that when we were in court and when I would pick him up from daycare, now I was a child adolescent mental health therapist at the time. His daycare was in the same building as I worked in. It was part of the same organization. And I would go back and I'd visit him during my breaks and had a really good relationship with him. And he started to run from me. And every time I tried to pick him up, he would like crawl, how they have tunnels and things, he would crawl in those to try to stay away from me. And it was like so heartbreaking at the time.
Yeah.
And I would have to, in my business clothes, I'd have to crawl through these tunnels. And the daycare workers they really felt sorry for me. I'm glad that they understood, because I think they saw that relationship that I had with my son beforehand. Otherwise, they probably would have been questioning about what's going on. And they were very aware. I did tell them, what he was going through at home, because I do think it's important for daycare workers to understand that there could be some stress on the children. And so that happened for months. And it would I get in the car and he was crying and I'm like holding back tears. But I didn't realize that I was actually going through that. And I never wanted to, take any custody or anything. I was just trying to get a plan. His father and I weren't ever married. So I was just trying to get a parenting plan, because it was kind of chaotic when he wanted to participate in parenting. In fact, the first attorney I went to, she told me not to file anything because I had all the rights and just to keep him from his father. And I absolutely did not agree with that. That was the worst $150 I had ever spent.
Yeah.
But here I was just trying to get something that was consistent after the breakup. And he was I know he's being told things, because as soon as things started settling down after court, he came back immediately. In fact, I still the other memory that popped up is the daycare worker told me when I walked in one day. He said that he asked, he had enough time to develop language in between this time, asked, who's picking me up today? And she told him his mom, and he said, good. And she was like really pleased to tell me that when he started to turn around and we could have that relationship back. So very interesting that before I even knew any of this went on, and now that I help people, that I was actually going through it and didn't know what the name of it was until years later.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I the more that I've learned about this, the more I've looked back on my own childhood and like realized, now my parents are still together, of course, but I came to realize that there was some alienation tactics, in that as well. And yeah,
Yeah, that's
it's
very good
wild.
important that you pointed that out, because Dr. Amy Baker, who is a huge researcher in this area, she actually found there's quite a bit of alienated children that their parents' marriage was still intact, but yet they were alienated from the target parent, even though they lived with the target parent. So, I mean, you're right. We have to acknowledge that this isn't about just separation and divorce families. This can occur in intact families as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I think some of the memories that come up for me is just like one parent just like uh oversharing, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Like we like each of us in turn would become like the personal therapist
That was
and
enmeshment.
enmeshment.
Yep, that's
Yes.
what it's called. Mm.
Yes. And so we were being told these things, and the parent that was being alienated was consistently silent because like they did not believe that like this should be information we were privy to until we started asking them questions. And when we started asking questions, they gave their side, and like me and my sisters and everything would be like, oh, well, that's not right that we were being told this. And especially as adults, we like all of us have had conversations of like, okay, like this is definitely something that we realize now was not appropriate behavior for a parent to do with their children. I mean, it's one thing for kids to notice something and ask questions about it, but you should really be delivering the information in an age appropriate way that is also not going to turn them against one or the other. Like,
I mean, think about what stress that's creating for your child, and your child can't do anything
yes,
to fix it. So it's just creating the
no,
stress, creating those stress hormones, the cortisol, and all
yeah,
the physiological effects as well as psychological effects it's going to have. So no, we absolutely need to protect our children from those kind of things. They are not privy. But yeah, you're right. That's confiding in children, one of the 17 alienating factors. So
yes,
one of the statistics that I think is pretty important, and I would like for the research community for us to find out more, but again, referring back to Dr. Amy Baker, does a lot of research in the area. Did research in New York in the adult population, it was like early adulthood, and found that I think it was like 28% of them reported that one parent tried to turn them against the other parent. Now, this is a general population. This is not just divorce population. So if we were to even look more into divorce population, that number is going to be increased probably tenfold. So it is something, this is a true pandemic for our children, and we need to be educated and be ready to help intervene if this is happening, as well as for the target parents. The target parents very much deserve a relationship. And we're talking about the foundation. These children go on, if they are alienated, to have long-term effects from this. So this isn't just like a bruise that they got while playing. This is life altering and sometimes even life threatening, because it does increase the statistics of suicide as well and depression. So we have to be cognizant of that.
Well, I'm sure that it affects their attachment style, and then they're a bit like that attachment style affects their relationships as an adult, you know,
Oh
it's
yeah. That's
yeah.
a really good point because 50% of children who were alienated end up being alienated, or parents who are alienated from their children as well. So they're either, again, we're looking at an abusive relationship,
Mhm.
and that child is either going to grow up with characteristics like the alienating parent and they're going to be an abuser, or they're going to go after a mate in a relationship that has those same kind of characteristics. And those are the children who end up being alienated from their children, adult children being alienated from their children because they're seeking out the same abusive relation or characteristics in a relationship. So this was such a great talk today. I really wish we
Yes.
could have gone live. But again, if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and comment below. We'll be checking them out. This is so much fun to do today, and I just feel such positive energy. So we're really going to get this out there, and we're the trailblazers, and you guys are helping us.
Absolutely.
So again, make sure you subscribe below, tell your friends, watch our videos, like our videos, and we are going to make a huge dent in this problem and take it down. So
Well, knowledge is power, you know, even if there's a situation where you can't do a whole lot, you can learn about it, you know, you gather as much information as you can.
yeah. All right. Well, signing off, Jennifer Segi here.
Kira Rush.
And thanks again for tuning in.